such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is a solved one about the criminals who Satan ordered to kill. The motives to murder can range from brain trauma to childhood abuse to pure revenge, yet few use a story this strange to blame for a victim being found in their own home. Two disturbed individuals came together to create a horrific reality, and the scary part is, we don't know where they are today. By the way, I post so much content like this. It is my absolute passion to tell these stories, and I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if it's something you would like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a nice comment down below. I also want to remind you it is ODDtober, so I'm posting every Thursday and Sunday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I'm posting these strangest stories all month long, so you definitely want to tune in. And also a reminder that my merch has been released, and here it is. I'm so happy with it, so excited, and I really hope you guys love it just as much. Remember to send me photos anytime that you get yours in the mail, because I would love to see it. Let's get back to the story. It was 2001 in Germany, and Frank Hackert lived in Bochum. He was 33 years old and known as a mild-mannered man who worked at a bakery. No one ever had a problem with him. He had such a good sense of humor. He really loved music and the Beatles, but he would end up going missing. You see, July 6th, Frank would be picked up to go to a friend's house party, and he would never return home. 3 days later, the police would break into this home to search for some answers. What they would find would be unlike any crime scene that they had ever seen, and they could have ever conjured up in their worst nightmares. The house itself was extremely creepy, or at least different than normal households. There was a poster of a hanged woman in the bathroom. There was human skulls littering the living room, and there was also blood-stained scalpels scattered all around the home. The most concerning part, though, was that there was a coffin, a human-sized adult coffin, in the living room. Unfortunately, a body did accompany this coffin, but it was not inside the coffin. It was actually lying outside of this coffin on the floor. And this was, in fact, Frank Hackert. He had been stabbed to death, but he also had one of the many blood-stained scalpels in the home still lodged into his stomach. A pentagram had also been sliced into his skin, and above his body was a banner that read, "When Satan Lives." The owners of this home were nowhere to be found, and investigators knew they needed to find them quick. If having a body and a coffin as a coffee table in your living room was not concerning enough, there was also a list of around 16 names, and investigators believed this was a hit list, and these two individuals were about to turn into serial killers. Frank's family, especially his mother, was horrified. Not only had her son been murdered, but investigators were horrified just as much as they were, and they were the ones who were supposed to see crime scenes 24/7. But her son had been tortured. The autopsy showed that he had been stabbed 66 times, and he had also been hit over the head with an object. So how did the police know where to find him? Well, that was because 3 days after his murder, because he had gone missing on the 6th and was found on the 9th, the owner's mother, one of the owner's mother, had gotten a letter in the mail. And this said, "I am not of this world. I must liberate my soul from the mortal flesh." This was from her daughter, and she believed that she was going to commit suicide, so she sent the police to go check on her. And instead of finding a woman suffering with mental illness and contemplating taking her life, they found a mutilated body in her home. The house was dark when they arrived in there, but using flashlights, they could see blood splatter covering the walls. 6 days after finding the body, the owners would be found in a place called Jenna. This was at a gas station, and they didn't put up any sort of fight to being arrested. They had been traveling around like nothing had happened. However, one of the names on their list of their next victims to kill did live in Jenna, and the police feared that they had already gotten to this woman to kill her. This was a woman who had already been connected to a murder case prior. This had been 7 years prior, in 1994, when her son had been killed by 3 schoolboys who committed a ritual black magic killing of their classmate. His mother was now on the owner's hit list, and so they really feared that they had already begun the killing spree. However, I do not believe they killed her or anyone else before being caught, thankfully. The owners of the home where Frank was found was finally in custody. This was Daniel and Manuala Ruda. They were a married couple who immediately admitted they killed Frank. Yet, they said it wasn't murder. You see, Danielle and Manuela said Satan ordered them to do it, that it simply had to be. Daniel said that they were simply a tool for Satan at the time of the attack. He compared themselves to being a car. You see, they said if you run someone over with a car, you don't prosecute the car. The driver is the guilty one. Daniel was 26 at the time. He was a car parts salesman, but he had gotten into the goth and heavy metal scene when he was around his 20s, and then he began to recruit young, impressionable people who were unemployed and needed help into what he wanted to tell the world. He was telling them to incorporate swastika symbols into their image because the shock value was good for the public, and if they did this, he would give them free concert tickets. But eventually this was not enough for him, and he wanted to be a bigger part of this community, wanted people to know who he really was, what he really could do. At this point, Daniel filed down his teeth to be like a vampire and created a band called the Blood-Sucking Freaks. They would attend satanic rituals, and they would go to parties where consented blood drinking would occur from one human to another. That's right, humans drinking other humans' blood like a vampire. Daniel said that he loved the taste of blood ever since he was 12, and he always craved the metallic, salty taste. Now he was living his dream. The problem was, to him, he was alone. He desperately wanted someone to be able to live this life with him, but he wouldn't be alone forever. Manuela, who was 23, had met Daniel when they were both looking for people to meet up with in their same community to get to know one another. Daniel had actually posted an advertisement in one of the heavy metal magazines, and this said, "Black-haired vampire seeks princess of darkness who despises everything and everybody and had bidden farewell to life." Manuela found it endearing and actually answered and wanted to get to know him. But she had an even darker history than Daniel. You see, she had been born in 1979 in a super small town in Germany, and her childhood was quite normal. Her parents loved her dearly and gave her everything as an only child. But by 13, everything changed, and normal for teenagers, her parents didn't worry too much when she started dressing in all black and being really moody. But then the behavior got even worse. It wasn't just her style changing, it was her attitude becoming explosive. And then, out of nowhere, the strangest thing that someone could do to someone else is what Manuela started to do. She would go up to people, strangers she didn't know, and bite them, teeth into their flesh, until they bled. And this was seemingly for no reason. Of course, after hearing this, her parents immediately took her to a psychiatrist to see if they could find what was wrong. She was getting frequent therapy, but her diagnosis was not something I could find, or if they gave her a diagnosis at this point in her life. But that's when her hallucinations started getting worse. She was hearing voices. Violent behavior was becoming a normal for her to her family, and her family were likely horrified of her, and they couldn't find anything else to do to help her. That's the thing, when there are violent children, there's no place to put them. There is no place to get help, and it's extremely hard to get help for these children and for these families who are suffering and not knowing how to get out of an abusive situation with their child. Manuela then began to say she had direct contact with the devil himself. She refused to go to school and eventually tried to take her own life. You see, she was doing drugs by this point. She tried to overdose, but she did thankfully survive this. And this suicide attempt and surviving it did make her change, but instead of her violent behavior just disappearing at 16 years old, she decided to run away all the way to the UK. From here, she found a place that was perfect for her. It was a goth nightclub that was open from midnight till dawn. Manuela there became infatuated with the idea of becoming a vampire. Men would come in and offer for her to drink their blood, and she would call them her blood donors. And at this point, she would often find people online too, just random strangers, if she wasn't getting enough blood at the club. Bite parties were also a thing that she attended, where everybody would literally go in with the craving of biting somebody, drinking their blood, and they would bite each other all over the bodies except for the jugular because it could kill them, I guess, and that was like an off-limits forbidden area. She was said to be an apprentice that was under all of these other, high vampires that were teaching her how to become a better one. She would drink all of this blood of men and they would drink hers in return if they were into that. But her life at this point was something she dreamed of as well. But the problem was she hated society. She hated working, and she still had to go to work during the day as a maid at a local hotel, and this normal life was not something she wanted to be a part of at all. But that's when she heard of a man named Tom Leopard, and he was known as the Leopard Man of Isle of Skye. He was 60 years old and completely reclusive. He lived near the sea in a hut, and he had completely separated himself from society. He was also known as the Leopard because he had become the world's most tattooed man, because he had tattooed his entire body with leopard spots. So upon hearing this, Manuela decided to try to write him and get to know him, saying that she hated society. And eventually, after talking for a while, she said she wanted to live with him. Surprisingly enough, he allowed her to. She moved in and they got along for a while, but eventually she realized that the reclusive life wasn't for her, and I'm sure it was because she could not attend these bite parties. She could not get her daily dose of blood. 3 years later, at only 19 years old, she decided to go back to her hometown in Germany. She got back into the goth scene, quickly made friends with people like her, people she met online. They were having rituals, they were drinking each other's blood, they were making plans to drink other people's blood, and she really found a crowd that she fit in with. But then she held a ritual on Halloween where she dedicated her soul to Satan and promised to serve him in the afterlife. But 2 years after this, she would read Daniel's advertisement in a magazine, and she instantly fell in love. Daniel's teeth had been shaven to basically fangs all over his mouth, whereas Manuela had replaced 2 of her teeth with animal fangs that appeared to be like vampire fangs. These two immediately had quite the connection. They were together all the time. They were both from middle-class families, had similar childhoods, and had quite a lot to talk about. Their main interest included avoiding the sunlight and sleeping together in a coffin. They would often go to holidays to England or Scotland. They would sleep in graveyards. They would go to devil-worshipping parties. And one night they actually dug a hole for Manuela to sleep in like it was her grave to see how it felt. Manuela even taught Daniel how to drink blood from a human without piercing an artery. They were a match made in heaven, or hell as they would have preferred. They both eventually stopped going to work. They stopped hanging out with friends. They were obsessed with each other and the devil, and that's all that they wanted to be connected to at this point. And after a year of being together, they decided they wanted to get married. And of course, because 6 was their favorite number, they got married the 6th day of the 6th month to make Satan happy. Animal sacrifices were something that they started to do often, and only a month after that, they would accomplish their first human sacrifice, their first human murder. Danielle and Manuela said that they had orders from Satan himself to kill. However, they got to choose the victim and decided on Frank, who they called Hacky because he was funny and they believed he would be the perfect court jester for Satan. That day they picked him up for the party, and it was just the three of them there alone. And when Frank was getting suspicious, they told him that everybody must be running late. They talked for a while, listened to music, but eventually they had a job to do, given to them by Satan. Something that they allegedly couldn't say no to. Manuela said she suddenly watched Daniel stand up. He had evil in his eyes, and she said she knew it was time. David then struck Frank over the head with a hammer, hitting him over and over, and Manuela screamed to stab him in the heart, which Daniel did 66 times. Daniel claimed to be in a state of euphoria, but he could hear Satan talking to them while it was happening. Manuela said that the knife was glowing and that she could feel the presence in the room, and that all the lights flickered as Frank died. She said that that's how she knew his soul was on its way down to Satan. This wasn't the end, though. The couple then went on to torture Frank. They burnt cigarettes into his skin, and they took a machete to chop at him. The next events that they said occurred sound more like fiction than reality. That's when the Rudas admitted that they cut Frank's veins open and they had his blood drain out into bowls so they could drink out of them. After drinking them, they prayed to Satan, and then everything was over. Their job was done for him, and they sacrificed a human for the first time. Yet Manuela was said to be disappointed because she believed doing this would cause her to become a real vampire, and that hadn't happened. She still had her fake teeth like before. They said that their plan was to kill Frank and then to take their own lives. The plan was said to come to Daniel in a dream, but this would not occur. You see, Daniel and Manuela decided to flee instead and continue killing for Satan. They just needed to await for his next command. A killing spree was the next step in their new plan, and with a new chainsaw, they knew exactly how they were going to do it. Thankfully, though, they were caught before this occurred, and now they were being charged with murder. Daniel began to tell his lawyers that he wouldn't have stopped with Frank, that he wanted to be known worldwide. He wanted that fame, and he wanted the notoriety of someone like Charles Manson. He said to do so, he knew he would have to kill, so he did. The trial began, and Manuela immediately requested that the windows be blacked out because she was a vampire and couldn't have sunlight nearby. This was not given to her, but she was given sunglasses to wear. But another friend of Daniel's, the one who was not murdered by him, would testify against him. This was another man named Frank, but he was Frank Lua, so I'll be calling him Lua to not confuse you. So Lua was said to have seen the dark side to Daniel before he ever murdered anybody. You see, the two had gotten into a fight, and Daniel was said to be becoming progressively combative and paranoid and like possessive of his ideas and his thoughts. And when they were having a fight, eventually Lua left, and Daniel would then send him a letter threatening him. And also enclosed with this letter was a picture of Daniel hanging upside down from basically metal chains from his ceiling, and he was covered in blood, and he was also holding guns out, pointing at the camera, which was pointing, through the picture to Lua. Everyone at this trial knew that these two individuals were deeply disturbed. But while all of this was happening and everyone was talking about them, Daniel and Manuela didn't seem to care. They were laughing while the murder was being discussed. They were sticking their tongue out, rolling their eyes. They were putting up the horn sign. They were doing anything possible to make it seem like all of this was a joke. They were staring at the victims' families and just keeping their eyes on them. They wore all black. Manuela was said to grow her fingernails out like claws. She also shaved an upside down cross into the side of her head. No remorse was shown whatsoever for either of them, and they believed that they were only vehicles doing Satan's work that had to be done. The media was all over this case from the very beginning. I mean, of course they were, with a title like Killer Vampire Lovers. It's a case that seems like it couldn't be true. Frank's family begged for these two to get life sentences because they were terrified and knew that these two people, if they could do this to Frank, it was scary to think what they could do to other people. Frank's mother, Doris, said, "I am psychiatrically scattered. I cry a lot. It would be a nightmare for me if they let him out." However, it was decided that both Daniel and Manuela had mental illnesses that had caused this murder. They were both diagnosed with severe narcissistic personality disturbances. Daniel was also found to have been diagnosed with a personality disorder as a child, but I'm not sure which one, and it wasn't said that he got much treatment for that, but this meant that they both could not be given life sentences, as they weren't fully in control of their actions. On January 31st, 2002, Manuela got 12 years and Daniel got 15. However, this would not be in prison. This would be in a psychiatric hospital. Now, the judge said they were humans, they were not monsters, and they needed to be helped. Now, this is great that the judge didn't just take the stigma of mental illness equaling a monster to sentence them. And although they were put into a hospital for 13 to 15 years, the judge did fail to see that that was probably not going to be enough time to help either of them, and the likelihood of them continuing to get help after they were released was very slim. Meaning that a little over a decade later, they would be released with possibly the same ideals that they had going in, and at that point, they would not be given any more help and be thrown back into the world they hadn't been in years. There had also been a ton of fan mail for these two killers, and people saying that they supported their messages, what they did was great, and this was really concerning to everybody. Frank's father actually said that he was glad that he attended the trial because it made him realize that they were not devils, but just people with an unsound mind. But many believe that this whole satanic possession was to get them out of a life sentence. People said they knew exactly what they were doing and needed a way out of the fact that they had just murdered somebody. Daniel even said, "May Satan remain with us always. This is just too stupid." Manuela actually divorced Daniel while they were in this maximum security hospital, and Manuela was then released in 2015 after serving her sentence. It's unknown if a psychiatric evaluation was done to see if this was the right thing to do to release her, or if they just did so because her time was up. But normally, it's the latter. She has been given a new name and been given court order not to contact Daniel for any reason. Now, Daniel would have been released 2 years later in 2017, yet this was not something that was going to occur, or so everyone thought. You see, Daniel had actually been working as a librarian at a prison and petitioned the year prior to this to be allowed to rejoin society. He wanted to show that he wasn't a dangerous man, he didn't do drugs or alcohol, and he just wanted to find a wife and have a family. But this wouldn't be happening, and that was mainly because he was going to have to go to trial for conspiracy to kill once again. Daniel said that this was grotesque, nonsense, and untrue. Yet it was found that 5 years prior, Daniel had contacted a woman online after his divorce and eventually told her the truth after they just talked for a while. And the truth was that he wanted his ex dead. He then tried to come up with this plan to hire this woman to kill her. And instead, the woman went to investigators. But this plan was said to be for this woman to get a job in the kitchen where his ex-wife was still at the hospital, and that she was going to kill her out of revenge. There was no official contract made, but this statement was made between the two of them. And a fellow prisoner also heard that Daniel wanted this murder to occur. Daniel said that everybody was lying to make themselves feel important and look important. However, Daniel was cleared of this charge of attempted murder. Frank's father says, "He will be walking into a bright future, and I will only be walking into the cemetery to visit my son." In September 2017, at 41 years old, Daniel was released as well. He was also given a new name. He had written a novel about his innocence while in jail, but both Daniel and Manuela have faded out of the public, and nobody really knows where they are today. Do you think Daniel and Manuela were really taken over by their mental illness, which caused them to think Satan was controlling them, and that's why they killed? Or do you think this was all an act to keep them out of jail? I have no doubt that they love the creepy side of life, but what I wonder is if they really were as delusional as they appear to be during the trial, or if that was just an act. Unfortunately, we will never know, but let's just hope that they're leading normal lives today and that they are getting the help that they deserve. This is also what they look like when they were released, just in case you want to know. I also want to point out that being into creepy things doesn't make you a killer, doesn't make you have mental illness, and being mentally ill doesn't make you a killer. I always want to specify that because I do not want that to come across that way. Unfortunately, sometimes mental illness can lead to murder, but that is not, the golden rule. It is not what happens with everybody. There are just certain circumstances where mental illness can lead you down a dark path. I think these two individuals had all of these combined to take their fantasies to the next level, and a level that no human should ever be able to. I really hope that they've continued to get help to silence the dark thoughts that plagued them, but I also want to ask who you think was the leader and the follower. Often with killer couples, there is one who is superior or takes over when it comes to these killing sprees or the actual murder itself. Who do you believe it was here? I personally think that Manuela led the satanic part of it, where she believed, Satan was talking to her and that she really got Daniel into that part of it. But I think Daniel was the one to lead the killing and would have been more likely to kill if Manuela wasn't there, whereas I think Manuela would have just continued down her vampire days if he wouldn't have been in her life. But I'd love to hear what you think about that, because of course that's just a theory that I have, but I could be completely wrong. I think in some ways they were both the leaders, which is strange. In a lot of these killer couples, we see that one is a lot more persuasive than the other, but I think that these two really were the perfect match. I don't think either were forced into something they didn't want to do. I think that they had their reasons, whether it was Satan or whether it was this lust to kill. But I thought that this was a very creepy story for ODDtober, and I hope it put you in the spooky spirit, and I hope it didn't creep you out too much, because honestly, all that blood drinking talk really just makes me nauseous. But this is what happened, and so I want to show you all types of murder cases and what can occur, and stay away from anybody who likes the taste of blood. That's my tip for today. Just stay away. If anybody says they like metal tastes, run. Just run. Cover your neck and run. Okay, well, remember that you can get my merch down below, and also to come back on Thursdays and Sundays at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, because I will be here waiting for you. Okay, don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.